In his essay Fundamental Fantasy and the Split of Law, Slavoj Žižek offers a critique of Jacques Lacan's thesis that the function of law is to mask the fundamental impossibility of human relationships. Žižek's argument is twofold: first, that Lacan's thesis underestimates the role played by fantasy in constituting our social reality, and second, that Lacan's concept of the split between the symbolic and the real fails to take into account the way in which this split is itself produced by our fantasies. Before moving on, I will quickly, if possible, recap Lacan's basic thesis about the split between the symbolic and the real. Lacan suggests that there is a fundamental tension between the symbolic and the real in the human psyche. The symbolic is the realm of language and ideas, while the real is that of the body and material reality. The relationship between the symbolic and the real is, however, not an unidirectional one. There is a split between the symbolic and the real that is produced by the relationship itself. In order to describe the relationship between the symbolic and the real, Lacan introduces the concept of the mirror stage. According to Lacan, the infant is initially fascinated by its own image in the mirror, but gradually realizes that the image in the mirror is not itself. Rather, the image in the mirror is a copy of the infant. This realization inaugurates the child's encounter with the real. From then on, everything the child sees in the world is a copy of something that is already inside the child. In other words, the real is not something that exists outside of the child, as Lacan suggests, but something that the child already contains within itself. This is why, according to Lacan, the real is a mirror image of the symbolic. The real is not something that can be discovered by looking at it from without, but something that can only be grasped by looking into it from within. Why is any of this important? Because Lacan's theory of the symbolic and the real is the foundation for much of the psychotherapy practiced today. In Lacanian theory, it is the desire for the real that is the source of human suffering, and the desire for the symbolic that is the source of human happiness. This is because the symbolic is a world of language and ideas, while the real is a world of the body and material reality. The split between the symbolic and the real is thus the source of all human conflict. The only way to resolve this conflict is to find a way to bridge the gap between the symbolic and the real. This is what Lacan calls the fundamental fantasy. This is why Lacanian theory is very much concerned with the pursuit of happiness. In fact, Lacan claims that the goal of psychoanalysis is to cure the unhappy person of his or her desire for the symbolic. According to Lacan, the symbolic is the source of all human suffering because it is the realm of the imaginary. The imaginary is the realm of dreams, fantasies, and hallucinations. The imaginary is, in other words, the realm of the false. The real is, by contrast, the realm of the true. In concrete terms, Lacan wants people to stop chasing after things that don't truly exist, like happiness or love. Instead, he wants people to focus on what does truly exist, the real. What is the real? Let's take an example, the concept of time. The symbolic corresponds to the realm of time as we experience it, while the real corresponds to the realm of time as it really is. The real is the realm of eternity, while the symbolic is the realm of temporality. The symbolic is the realm of change, while the real is the realm of stasis. The real is the realm of death, while the symbolic is the realm of life. The real is the realm of the father, while the symbolic is the realm of the mother. The symbolic is the realm of language, while the real is the realm of reality. These are just a few examples, but they illustrate the fundamental tension between the symbolic and the real in human life. This is why Lacan claims that the only way to be happy is to accept one's own death. Human beings are doomed to dissatisfaction because, as Lacan puts it, everything we love we destroy or betray. In other words, human beings are never able to enjoy the present because they are always haunted by the past and the future. Lacan's theory of the symbolic and the real is a very dark one, and it is for this reason that many people are uncomfortable with it. Lacan's theory is, in fact, very similar to the idea of existentialism, but continuing on with Žižek's critique of Lacan, he points out that the split between the symbolic and the real is not static but dynamic. In his essay Fundamental Fantasy and the Split of Law, Slavoj Žižek offers a critique of Jacques Lacan's thesis that the function of law is to mask the fundamental impossibility of human relationships. Žižek's argument is twofold. First, that Lacan's thesis underestimates the role played by fantasy in constituting our social reality, and second, that Lacan's concept of the split between the symbolic and the real fails to take into account the way in which this split is itself produced by our fantasies. I will argue that Žižek's own account of fantasy suffers from similar problems, and that his attempt to rescue Lacan's theory ultimately fails. The first part of Žižek's criticism concerns Lacan's claim that law functions to cover up or deny the fundamental impossibility of human relationships. According to Lacan, this impossibility arises from two sources. First, from the fact that human beings are always already split between their desire and their need, and second, from the way in which language constituted us as subjects who are always already estranged from ourselves. This estrangement means that we can never know what another person really wants or needs, since these things are always mediated through language. As a result, any attempt to establish a relationship with another person is fraught with difficulty and potential conflict. The function of law, then, is to provide a symbolic framework within which these difficulties can be negotiated and resolved. In other words, law functions as a way of masking or denying the underlying impossibility of human relationships. Žižek agrees with Lacan that human relationships are fundamentally impossible, but he takes issue with Lacan's claim that law functions to cover up this impossibility. For Žižek, it is not enough to say that law merely covers up or masks our social realities, rather, he claims that law actually constitutes those realities. In other words, our social reality is not something given or natural, but something that is constructed through our legal system. Fantasy, for Žižek, is not simply a screen that hides the real from us, but is involved in the very constitution of the real. This is why, according to Žižek, the only way to change the real is to change our fantasies. That is, we can only resolve the conflict between the symbolic and the real by exploring our own fantasies and by striving to create a world that is closer to the idealized versions of our own symbolic realm. Žižek's critique of Lacan is, in a way, a critique of ourselves. It is, in fact, an indictment of our own symbolic realm. This claim leads Žižek to his second criticism of Lacan, namely, that Lacan fails to take into account the role played by fantasy in constituting our social reality. Lacan argues that there is a split between the symbolic order, that is, language, and the real, that which escapes symbolization. This split enables us to understand reality in terms of oppositions such as cause/effect or subject/object. However, according to Žižek, this opposition does not really exist, rather, it is something that we create through our fantasies. Fantasies allow us to bridge the gap between the symbolic and real orders by filling in the gaps left by symbols, that is, by creating meaning where there was previously only absence. In other words, they allow us to make sense of an otherwise unintelligible world. For example, take a look at the Harry Potter series. This series features a world in which magical creatures, such as witches and wizards, live alongside humans. However, the magical creatures are never fully comprehended by humans, instead, they are represented by metaphors, such as flying cars or dragons. In this way, the magical creatures become a way of representing the unrepresentable, namely, the real. We can understand the events in history by understanding the underlying conflict between the symbolic and the real. Or, we can understand the workings of the economy by understanding the underlying conflict between the symbolic and the material world. Žižek is, in a way, criticizing the very function of fantasy. It is not simply a way of escaping from reality, but is actually necessary for creating a meaningful and rational social world. A final example is that of the Minotaur. We can understand the story of the Minotaur by relying on our own fantasies, which fill in the gaps left by the symbolic order. We create a world in which the Minotaur is not just a terrifying monster, but also a powerful symbol of our own fears and desires. In this way, our fantasies not only provide us with a sense of order and meaning, but also help us to cope with the chaos and uncertainty of the real world.